Connectivity Scorecard 2009 is the next phase of the global ICT measure and now ranks 50 countries on the approximately 30 indicators of connectivity, including broadband, fixed line, mobile, and computing technologies that contribute to a country's social and economic development. The scorecard was created by Leonard Waverman, Fellow of the London Business School and Professor and Dean at the Haskayne School of Business at the University of Calgary, and commissioned by Nokia Siemens Networks to examine the relationship between connectivity and economic prosperity.
So we've expanded a number of countries, and we've now put it on a basis of data that will always be available, that's not proprietary, and where updates every year or every 2 years can be made more easily.
The methodology behind the Connectivity Scorecard remains substantially the same. We have reviewed and replaced some of the individual metrics that we were looking at to assess countries' performance, but the basic principles behind the Connectivity Scorecard remain absolutely the same as they were. We expanded the number of economies in this year's scorecard largely because we got a very positive response from policymakers, journalists, people that are active in the communications and IT fields, and a lot of the questions were on the lines of why wasn't my country included, or if you had included Denmark, would Canada look so good? Questions like that, so this was an attempt to answer those questions. In terms of how it's affected country scores, there would be two effects. One is a sheer effect of including more countries. So, for example, the United Kingdom or Japan or Finland had moved down in the ranking simply because we included 4 or 5 other countries that were in the same league as those countries. And some individual countries may have looked extremely good last year because they were benchmarked against a smaller set of countries, and this year the inclusion of more countries, including some high performers, may have affected where they land up in the scorecard.
When we came out with the first scorecard in early 2008, we were in a position where we were trying to find reliable data for many of the economies that we were doing the research for. The governments and the policymakers have been especially helpful in this regard. They contacted us, they gave us access to information that otherwise we didn't have access to. We were enthusiastic about the opportunity of taking part in the research itself, and that has helped us, I would say, enormously for the second version of the Connectivity Scorecard.
The main changes to the innovation-driven economy scorecard was the inclusion of additional high-performing countries such as the Netherlands, Norway and Denmark, and as we expected, they scored rather well. And the countries that scored well last year, generally when you look at them in relative terms, continued to score well this year. So United States and Sweden still finished very highly. The United Kingdom, Canada, Australia were all good performers as they were last year. If there were any surprises, they were more minor league surprises, such as Ireland finishing in the middle of the pack, whereas we might have, based on prior expectations, expected it to finish slightly below the median or the middle of the pack.
The U.S. does better than they would have done last year, mainly because of the large investment that's going on in fiber, in the access network by the telcos such as Verizon and by the cable companies such as Comcast. That's really new. And so the U.S., I think, is advancing in terms of investments in the area. And so that's one reason why it's increased.
The second surprise, maybe less positive, is the divergence between the European Union economies. When we did a clustering exercise, of the EU economies, we found out that you have some EU economies that are the top performers. And then you have other EU economies that are the low performers of the scorecard. And thus, when you think of the goals and the objectives of the European Union to really construct the European Union to be the center for competitiveness in the global economy, it clearly shows that there is much to be done in order to bring those EU economies closer together instead of them being miles apart.
Last year, Korea did substantially worse in our scorecard than anyone had ever measured before. And that's because of the weight of the business sector and because of looking at connectivity as a productivity tool. In Korea, connectivity is not very much a productivity tool. It's not a tool used by big business. They don't have a lot of the kind of ICT software and skills that are used, for example, in the US or Sweden or Finland. And so that accounts for their relatively low score.
As with the innovation-driven economy scorecard, the main change this year was the expansion of the scorecard and also the selection of different individual metrics that we use to assess countries. Malaysia, which topped the scorecard last year, continues to finish at the top this year, even though we've added 16 more countries to the scorecard. We also found that, perhaps rather to our surprise, Turkey finished quite highly, but then we looked at the situation and realized that our surprise was largely the product of the fact that we normally try and compare Turkey to European countries, whereas here we're benchmarking it against a set of countries that are at comparable levels of development, and we find that, well, in reality, Turkey stacks up reasonably well, pretty well. So there are some surprises along those lines, but I would not term them major surprises. We wouldn't say that there were major surprises in terms of where the countries that were new to the scorecard finished up in the rankings. So countries like the Netherlands, Norway and Denmark, which we would have expected to do well, did pretty well. Again, in the resource and efficiency-driven economies, the countries that we added did about in line with expectations. So countries like Turkey and Chile, when you look at them and where they rank in terms of general level of development compared to the whole sample that we used, they finished about in line with expectations. Countries that are high performers in the scorecard tend to have a relatively well-educated workforce. They tend to be quite flexible and quite smart about how governments interact with businesses, for example. They tend to have good political, legal and regulatory environments.
I think it has a positive impact overall when thinking about that. Now we have evidence of the benefits of ICT and communication technology specifically on economic growth and economic productivity, which is the key enabler for future economic development.
What we're showing here is that productivity enables more economic growth out of existing resources. And productivity is a key driver. So what government should be taking out of this is that connectivity, infrastructure, skills, and the complementary capital is a key component of a modern 21st century country.
So in general, there's been a great deal of interest in the rankings. There's been a great deal of interest in why particular countries didn't perform well. We've even received suggestions from governments and policymakers about what data to include and what factors we should look at and what we didn't look at. So clearly countries take this very seriously, some of them perhaps too seriously, but you know, that's a testament to the fact that it is being noticed.
Well, I think it's been well received by many governments who look at it and wonder why they're not doing well, and then they start understanding the gaps that exist. So I think governments are grappling with what it means for them and thinking of what the policy solutions are.
It's being picked up by economists that are doing research, so from the serious side, as well as when thinking about both businesses and policymakers, they are seeing it as a piece of research that gives them an opportunity to tie that into their specific technology developments, into their specific strategies and specific ideas about how to increase the economic performance.
The response we've had shows that it does measure something really appropriate for today, and that it is looking at telecom networks in a very fundamentally different way that other indices do. And by bringing in these notions of skills, these notions really of the software, a lot of the measures we have are basically software applications. It's the applications, the kinds of capital, the investments that firms need to make infrastructure into this economic growth tool. So that, to me, is what Connectivity Scorecard is. It's a very innovative way of addressing what a 21st century network really is.
For further information about the Connectivity Scorecard, please visit our website, www.connectivityscorecard.org.